Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Amma ba'da. Habitifillah, a question was asked, Assalamu alaikum. When seeking knowledge overseas with the ulama the traditional way, do they quiz you one by one? Do they require you to memorize the lesson? Do they check your comprehension and understanding of each lesson? Can you elaborate on Sheikh Muqbil's rahmatullahi teaching style? I heard the brothers in Yemen are memorization machines. جزاك الله خيرا وأسأل الله أن يجعلك مباركا أينما كنت. آمين جميعا. So this is a very beneficial question. It's something we talked about prior to this in one of the videos about the differences that I observe having the blessing of having been to and experience both environments, experience how the Dar Hadith institutes in Yemen, how some of them are run in general, and also to see how more classroom environment in in Saudi Arabia, in some of the places there, as well as of course, the halaqat of the ulama. And so what I would say is, as far as having a scholar or a student of knowledge quiz you one by one, and do they require you to memorize the lesson and things like this, and the comprehension of each lesson, I think that would depend upon the size of the halaqah and what the sheikh's, I guess, intent is in his lesson. Is it to go through the book and just give general benefit, or is he trying to really teach certain students? Because most of the time you have to realize in many of those lessons, especially with the scholars in Yemen, Imam Muqbil, whether it was Sheikh Yahya al-Hajuri, or many, especially those very popular mashayikh there, then they had hundreds and thousands of students. So obviously they're not going to be able to really, it's not going to be one by one and things like this. They may call out certain students that are probably their more active students, ask questions. So that's one thing I will say that I saw more in Yemen, those kind of, that type of engagement. And probably more so with students of knowledge that had smaller study circles. So if you've got a study circle of 10 people, then it's much easier than a lot of times you find that those kind of study circles, that there's going to be much more engagement, and he's going to go around and test everyone. Did you revise the lesson from yesterday? Quote this hadith. And I know one thing I recall from Dar Hadith in Sheher, Sheikh Abdullah al-Mar'i, hafidhullah ta'ala, that he would, just ask, and I think this is very common in the Yemeni Maracas, that they will call out, and maybe not even specific individuals, but they'll just ask who wants to recite the hadith. Like he's explaining Umdat Ahkam, for example, which is a book of hadith regarding fiqh rulings, if you will. And he may say, okay, who's going to read a hadith, and you can raise your hand, and then if you've memorized a hadith, and you can attempt to recite the hadith, and then he'll go into the lesson and teach. So it really depends on the type of sitting that you're in, and as I said, most of the time the scholars there are overwhelmed with hundreds of students, or more often than not, at least 50 to 100 students, and sometimes, like I said, hundreds, and sometimes in a place like Damaj, because it's so big, and you have so many students there, you might have a couple thousand in the room. It's just a room full of students. So you can't really give it that type of concentration on the individual students. And definitely Yemen, and I talked about this, like I said, in detail in another video, and if I find the link, I'll send it to post it on this comment, that one thing I'll say, because Yemen, the custom is a bit different, and I would say in general, Yemen is, the students of knowledge. There's a lot more students of knowledge, compared. Saudi Arabia is different, and there's lots of Saudi students of knowledge. But for example, if you go to Medina and a lot of places like this, you find mostly it's foreigners in the sitting with those, many of the mashayikh that you read about or you hear about. It's mainly, it's not many Saudis in those groups. And if you ask the average Saudis, they may not even know mashayikh that are teaching in the haram. Like a lot of times my students, I would talk to them, I say, oh, Sheikh Abdul Masin al-Bad, they have no idea. They only knew the very famous ones that come on TV, those scholars that come on TV and so forth. And even they may not even know Imam Fozan like that, really. They may know him just because he's out there, he's pumped out in the mufti, but they don't really listen to them and so forth. So you see a very different way, and there's many different reasons for that. Whereas Yemen, it's poor. And bottom line, I used to talk to some of the lab and witness it. And I'd say, and then some of them would say, it's a barakah that we are poor in a sense, because look at all the brothers around the masjid that go to the masjid and are, associated with the dawah. So many of the brothers, because they didn't have employment, they didn't have other options, so they'd just be hanging out, reading, reciting, memorizing Quran and stuff like this. So at least there was a lot that were doing. So you see the hars, the vigilance for seeking knowledge. You see, I recall hearing when Sheikh Obaid came, and I'm not sure if I was in Yemen at the time. I didn't see him when he came from Sardiya, came from Medina, and visited some of the Marrakech there. And what I heard is the way they traveled, and I could see even for local mashayikh, they will just travel busfuls of Yemenis from around the country. If there's when Sheikh, one of the mashayikh would, even one of the local mashayikh, the masajid would just be packed in Aden and other places. So you just really see they have a vigilance for really seeking knowledge like that. A thing that I mentioned it again in detail, which is a difference, is that also, though, what I will say, you have those great benefits in Yemen. But what I will say, and I believe that the knowledge is much stronger, the level of knowledge, no doubt, is much stronger in Sardiya, because you have a government that helps preserve the dawah and propagate the dawah and encourage the dawah. So you have so many major scholars here, whereas Yemen, most of the scholars were younger. You had some elders like Sheikh Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab al-Wasabi after Sheikh Muqbil, rahimahumullah jami'an, and others. But like I said, the level of knowledge, mostly, most of those mashayikh in Yemen could only go back to Sheikh Muqbil, as far as most of the Salafi mashayikh, and maybe some of them did some talib al-ilm like Sheikh Abdullah in Saudi as well. But Saudi, you have a different silsila, you have a different strength. You have scholars that are descendants of Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, and so it's like, oh yeah, my grandfather, my great grandfather, my great grandfather, my great great grandfather was Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, and this is how we learn. So they know when they inherited that. They didn't inherit it from their blood, but they inherited, it's like their grandfather was a scholar, their great, and major scholars. So the level of knowledge, Ben Uthaymeen, Ben Baz, and they're scholars, and you just have such a different wealth of knowledge and a level of knowledge. So I would say you learn a different, I will say, from what I witnessed, generally kind of understanding, because of that great wealth of knowledge and treasures that you find here in Sardiya, as far as the level of scholarship and exposure. And I'll just say that. So with that being the case, we ask Allah the Almighty to accept our good and forgive our evil. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam ala nabiyyina Muhammad.